Now can you hear me? No?
We can hear you.
Hello? Yes?
Hi, good morning. We can hear you.
Yes. I can.
Okay, that's good. Can I just ask, can you mute yourself and turn off your video just until the hearing started, please?
Yep. Okay.
Thank you.
Hello. No. Bar to unmute. Temporarily on.
Well, good morning, everybody. It's now 9:30, so it's time for me to open this examination session into the New Southwark Plan. For those of you who've not attended previously, just to introduce myself, my name is David Spencer, and together with my colleague, Mr. Milam, we are the two inspectors appointed by the Secretary of State to carry out the independent examination of the New Southwark Plan. I trust everybody can hear me and where necessary see me. Given there are a few people here who haven't been to sort of previous sessions, just to briefly outline how these work. Obviously we're doing this by Zoom in this new sort of virtual world. So if people can make sure your sort of mobile phones are kind of switched off, you're reasonably free of distractions. And what's recommended, I think, for the stability of the call is that people are on mute and cameras off. And then when you want to make a particular contribution, just unmute yourself, and where you want to switch your camera on. And then once you've made your contribution, remute and turn camera off. There are functions in Zoom such as chat and share screen documents. We're not using those as part of the examination. All documents should be already lodged within the examination process. But if you do wish to make a particular contribution at any point, there is a raise your hand function within Zoom. It's in various places, but it's the yellow hand symbol. If you click on that, that will highlight or signal to both myself and Mr. Milam that you wish to make a contribution, and then we can bring you in at the relevant point. More generally, if you've got any queries about the examination process and how it's working, your first point of contact is Jacqueline Christie, who's the Programme Officer assisting the examination. Jacqueline's details are on the website, and the website is being regularly updated, and I would recommend the examination overview page, because that's giving you a regular kind of overview of what's happening and what documents are being added. Now, today's hearings are looking at the Old Kent Road area vision. And then we've got two further sessions today to look at the various sites that are within the Old Kent Road area vision. Just to advise everybody, as inspectors, we've been to the area, we've looked at the sites, we've read people's representations and statements, so there's no need for people to read out any sort of statements that they've already provided. What we want to have is obviously a discussion today around the soundness of the council's or the plan's approach to Old Kent Road. And that means, is the plan going to be justified, effective, positively prepared, consistent with national policy? And we've also got to bear in mind conformity with the London plan. We've prepared an agenda or agendas for today around which we want to kind of steer the discussion. We've got a number of questions that we want to put to the council, and then we'll bring in other people to speak on particular points. I think what's helpful for us to, as inspectors, is that where people think that the plan is, or consider that the plan is unsound, you know, what do you think needs to be changed or amended to make the plan justified and effective? Are there any initial questions just at this stage about how these hearings work? No? Okay, well, we'll see as we go along, and hopefully everybody will get an opportunity to put across the particular points that they wish to. So starting and sort of turning to the agenda, or sorry, before I do that, just to regularly check, as we do with the council, to just confirm who'll be assisting us, Ms. Seymour from the council's team for this session.
Ms Hills will be leading on evidence for this session, and I'll be contributing. Also, we are expecting Mr Cutts and Mr Wilson. I'm not sure where they are, but they should be here in a moment. I've just emailed them to find out if they're having connection issues.
Okay.
Oh, here's Mr Wilson now. I can see him joining. And there's also Mr Cutts as well, who you've met before, so they will both be attending.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for that. Okay, so if I can start with the agenda that we've circulated, it's based on a sort of combination of our previously circulated matters, issues and questions, and then together with the statements that people have provided into the examination back in February. Obviously, the council has confirmed that the area vision is to be regarded and treated as effectively policy, and obviously it's accompanied by a vision map that's separate to the policies map. I think the first stage is just to understand, so since the part 1 hearings, there have kind of been various events have occurred and may lead to kind of various updates to the vision or to the vision map or the policies map. The first one is really regarding the safeguarding of the Bakerloo line extension. I appreciate that the Secretary of State's direction came in on the 1st of March, and I think we were briefly able to discuss this towards the end of the part 1 hearings. But my general question to the council is there a consequence that now arises for this plan as a result of that that direction in terms of any sort of potential changes that may now need to be made to the New Southwark plan?
Thank you, sir. Yes, we've agreed a couple of updates with TfL regarding the Bakerloo line extension safeguarding directions, and think that there should be some modifications to the vision and policy IP2 to ensure that the safeguarding direction is reflected in the New Southwark plan. So we've agreed additional wording underneath the phasing section of the Old Kent Road vision and some additional reasoning in IP2 where we've already referenced the Bakerloo line extension as a project. And in addition, we'd put the Bakerloo line safeguarding areas of surface and subsurface interest on the planning policies map.
Okay, thank you for that. And in terms of the weight or significance of these of the Secretary of State's sort of direction, I mean, what does it kind of signify in terms of the project? And it's been put to us at kind of previous sessions that this is potentially of little weight because until the finances are agreed, this potentially doesn't mean that much in the grand scheme of things. What's the council's kind of rebuttal or TfL's rebuttal to kind of that view? What weight should we be giving this kind of direction now?
Yes, Sarah, I think it shows a direction of travel in terms of commitment to the project. That's reflected in the London plan as a commitment and therefore fed down into the New Southwark plan as well. And now we've got the safeguarding directions made that is more recent, and then therefore we've reflected that in the policy.
Thank you. And Chris Porter, please, from Transport for London.
Hi, good morning. Apologies, I can't seem to turn on my video, but hopefully you can hear me. I think I'd just like to support Ms. Hill's point. I mean, from our perspective, this is quite a significant development, and it shows a level of confidence in the scheme from central government and a sort of recognition of the benefits and importance of the scheme. So from our perspective, this is actually sort of should carry quite significant weight. I mean, I think we accept that what it does is it acts to protect the scheme for future delivery. So what it doesn't do is allow us to construct or operate the scheme, which is something we do through a Transport and Works Act order, and nor does it represent a government commitment to fund the project, but it is a step forward in enabling us to deliver it and protect the future delivery.
And is the order in any way kind of time limited, or is it now it's in place? It's in place until?
No, it's in place in perpetuity until such time as the Secretary of State may choose to remove that.
Thank you for that. Now, obviously, in front of before the examination, I'm getting a bit of feedback. I don't know if that's other people are getting that. Yeah, I don't know. Yeah, I don't know if it helps. Yeah, I think it helps, Mr. Porter, if you remute. That's helpful. Obviously, there's a number of sort of documents now in front of the examination around the Bakerloo line extension. We've got kind of various economic impact assessments, the options reports, consultation reports, and we've now got the safeguarding orders. I mean, as inspectors for this report, I mean, can we kind of reasonably or logically conclude that there is now a reasonable prospect that the Bakerloo line extension is going to take place based on the evidence that's before us? I think obviously also recognising that it's a key component of the London plan, the recently kind of finalised London plan in terms of supporting opportunity area growth through Southwark, Lewisham and potentially beyond. I mean, can we say there is that kind of reasonable prospect that the Bakerloo line extension is going to go ahead?
I think that's a reason. What we can say is there is a reasonable prospect that the scheme will go ahead. What we're unable to confirm at this time is when that's likely to be and the timing. I think the funding discussions that TfL as an organisation is having with central government is well known. Until that's concluded, what we're unable to do is give a timetable. But as you've sort of correctly stated, looking at the Mayor's Transport Strategy, the London Plan, the recently issued directions, as well as the position that the organisation is taking with the Financial Sustainability Plan, which I understand has been discussed at previous sessions, where the Bakerloo line extension is part of our preferred scenario. So on that basis, I think it is reasonable to assume that the scheme will come forward, but what we can't do is say when that's likely to be, and it remains subject to confirmation of a funding package, which is dependent on discussions with government.
Okay. Thank you for that. And obviously the area vision has now been amended to kind of reflect the kind of the phase 1, phase 2 kind of balance in terms of sort of the planned growth. I think there has to be, or there is sort of an anticipation as to, and obviously that phasing is kind of linked to the timing of when a construction contract is let. I think it's been sort of the identified or agreed kind of trigger point as to when potentially phase 2 development could come forward. From everything I've read, I mean, there's an anticipation, and I sort of underline that word anticipation, that contract could be let in 2024/2025. Appreciate what you said, Mr. Porter, in terms of looking at the time frame going forward. But just in sort of very general terms, I mean, is that a reasonable anticipation, accepting it could change, but is that a reasonable kind of starting point?
I mean, I think given where we are and the impact of recent events, 2024/25 is likely to be unrealistic. So I think the earliest we'd anticipate being able to sign a construction contract would be towards the end of the 2020s. Now, you'll appreciate that this is very much dependent on funding, but we'd anticipate, subject to that funding, being able to develop the scheme up to a Transports and Works Act order, going through that process with an almost certain public inquiry, after which we'd expect to be in a position to sign that contract. So we'd anticipate that being later this decade at the earliest.
Thank you. And in terms of, I mean, I appreciate that's still within the sort of the plan period that we're looking at as part of the NSP. In the interim, and the council's advised on what capacity is, where it's sort of achieving the sort of the capacity identified for phase 1, the 9.5 thousand homes. I mean, is there potentially, with further work, analysis, some flexibility on that if other sort of transport infrastructure or other sort of infrastructure improvements are identified that could assist delivery in the Old Kent Road area? Or is that sort of 9,500 home, 10,500 home figure sort of reasonably fixed? I don't know if
So, I mean, I can answer first, and then I'll let the council assist. I mean, we've worked very closely with the council looking at the capacity and understanding how development may essentially come forward in line with the available transport capacity. And that's how we've ended up with the position which we're all supportive of around the development cap. And that really sort of does two things. It sort of makes sure that the network is able to accommodate the additional trips generated by the growth in the corridor and doesn't become overloaded. And that's sort of very much focusing in on what realistically the bus network can do. Secondly, it also recognises the step change in connectivity, accessibility, capacity that the tube extension would bring. So once delivered, it makes sure that the level of development is optimised once there's the level of certainty. So sort of contributing to the wider aims of sustainability and growth across London, where we want new development to be in areas that are well connected with good public transport. So it really comes down to what can we do before the Bakerloo line comes, which then feeds back to the bus network. And I think in answer to your question, is there any flexibility? We'd anticipate there being a level. So this is based on work that we've done from 2016 onwards. We anticipate that things change, and we're in the process of reviewing that position with the council. But realistically, we don't anticipate that changing significantly. It may be a small amount either way, but effectively we are constrained by the nature of the highway network and the bus services that we're able to run there. And there is effectively a finite capacity given by essentially the capacity of the buses themselves, the road widths, junction capacity, which means that we're unable to get a significant increase in buses without wholesale changes to the network, which is unrealistic. So while we do anticipate there being the opportunity for some flexibility, as there should be, I think we recognise things change, we don't anticipate it being significant.
Okay, thank you for that. I think Mr. Wilson for the council, please.
Yeah, just to reinforce what Chris has said. So we're currently undertaking a transport modelling study with TfL, which is looking at some transport capacity in the Old Kent Road, particularly looking at buses. We'd hope to have a kind of an initial draft report on that in the next month, and that's basically a pretty detailed transport modelling study using TfL's models as a basis, and also reviewing the transport assessments that we've had with all the planning applications which have been through process over the last 3 years or so. So it's kind of updating that evidence base, and as Chris said, just seeing if there is any flexibility and where that might be. In addition, we have been collecting 106 payments, £2,700 per home in the area as schemes are implemented. So what it's also looking at is where that money could be spent, what kind of phasing there will be for the delivery of that cash and that cash flow, and so how that could deliver enhancements in the period before the Bakerloo line is committed to.
Okay, thank you.
Sorry, could I interrupt a moment? Could Jackie just let Laura Hills back in? Her internet down. Sorry, she can't get back into the meeting. Sorry, sir.
That's okay. Yeah, I had noted. Yeah. Okay.
Okay, she's come back in. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you for that. And in terms of just double checking, come back to the safeguarding orders, obviously they're in sort of two parts, the route itself, and then obviously there is some surface infrastructure or surface areas of interest. Does that have any consequences for the Old Kent Road allocations as they're currently presented in the new Southwark plan? Does there need to be any kind of modification to the sites themselves where they now have an order for surface area interest?
For the
Sorry, Laura, you go for it.
yeah, for the surface impact sites, it would be NSP 56, the Tesco store site, and NSP 68, the old Toys R Us site. And in both of those, we have reference that the site needs to make provision for, just finding the wording, station tunnelling and worksite requirements, which need to be incorporated in the site design and phasing. So we have already incorporated that wording and recognise the potential for those sites to host a new underground station. And that's based on where we are with the preferred option of the route and station locations.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for that. Are there any further points anybody else wishes to make in relation to the safeguarding directions? Mr. Brearley, please.
Thank you. Good morning. I have it in front of me, but this whatever the financial planning, there's a bit of optimism bias going on in what you've just heard. I think the phrase is beyond 2030 in that document. So to say the end of this decade, it's actually at best the start of the next decade that it might start being possible to think about there being funding for this project. That's how I understand TfL assess it in their, what's effectively their survival plan, which is the mode they're in at the moment. So of course, very long way off.
Okay, thank you. The quality of your connection, Mr. Brearley, was a bit sort of patchy, but I think I got the gist of what you were saying on that. I mean, I've heard the respective positions. There's nothing further I wanted to explore on the safeguarding. I'd give the council or Mr. Porter the opportunity to respond, but I'm pretty clear on what you're telling me. In which case, can I move on then, please? Just in terms of other updates, I'm obviously mindful consultation on the Old Kent Road Area Action Plan, I think ended, was it earlier this month? Is that correct in terms of, or is it?
It's been extended to the 10th of May, sir.
10th of May, okay. And in terms of that document and understanding its status, I mean, is this effectively the council's kind of final consultation on the Old Kent Road Area Action Plan before it's submitted for an examination? Is that sort of the stage you're now at and the status of that document?
Yes, so there may be some amends that we make for the submission version, but this is the final informal version. And then we will be bringing, we'll be submitting, so we will be making any amendments from the informal consultation. And then as soon as we get your report on the new Southwark plan, we'll go to the following cabinet with the final submission version for adoption, for consultation.
Okay, thank you for that. And then earlier in this week we had sort of general discussion on site methodologies and just sort of general presentation of area vision plans. And I think the council at that session referred to potentially some updates to particular vision maps. I wasn't sure if the Old Kent Road would be one of those vision maps that would be sort of affected by, I think, a number of the sort of the changes that the council was indicating in terms of the business improvement district boundaries, and I think there were other sort of boundaries and updates I think the council wanted to sort of put in revised area vision maps. Would that have implications for Old Kent Road?
Not significantly, sir. We were just going to make some of the area vision maps, town centre boundaries, CAS bid area boundaries, where there's some bid areas surrounding it, but not in Old Kent Road itself. There's no neighbourhood plan for this area. So we just put some of the designations on the policies map for clarity, but nothing material.
Okay, thank you for that. I think I got the gist of that. The quality of the connection there was a bit hit and miss, but I think I understood what you're advising, Ms. Hills. That's helpful. I've got nothing further in terms of further sort of updates since we've had sort of the part 1 hearings. Not expecting any sort of further points at this stage. So I'm going to move on in terms of agenda item 2. I think this is sort of more sort of factual updates. I think we covered this to a certain extent on Monday's session. Obviously, a number of sites now on Old Kent Road not only have planning permission, but they're under construction, and some are indeed completed, including a number of whole allocation sites. I mean, there tend to be some of the smaller sites on Old Kent Road sites. I think it's 59 and 60 certainly are wholly under construction. I think the council's indicated you're still going to keep these as allocations, despite that status and circumstances. You still think it's necessary to kind of have a policy framework in case, notwithstanding these sites are under construction, a revised scheme or something of that nature comes in on them?
Yes, so as with the other sites, we think that it's worth keeping them even whilst they are under construction, because that can stop and other things can be promoted and applied for, and changes can be applied for, and therefore we think it's worth keeping them. We will be updating the sites when we have the EIP examination. So any that were completed at that point, we would remove and just show in our monitoring rather than in our plan. So we would update these pretty soon after the new Southwark plan's adopted anyway on the Old Kent Road through the EIP.
Okay, thank you for that. And in terms of just looking at the council's updated documents, this document EIP 82A, which is the kind of site methodology paper, and you've updated your 5 and 15 year housing land supply. I mean, looking at the evidence on Old Kent Road, there's obviously now an appreciable number of planning consents. Not many of them appear to now be subject to Section 106, so quite a few obviously progressing in terms of their certainty. I think the council's making a forecast that there's going to be, I think, looking at the figures, an appreciable contribution to sort of housing supply, including in the 5-year period from Old Kent Road sites. I mean, I just wondered from the council's kind of practical sort of point of view on the ground. I mean, given the sort of the phasing strategy that's kind of identified, does that in itself potentially lead to kind of an incentivization for people to kind of get on and deliver? That if you've got a permission within effectively phase 1, if you don't act on that, does it then have the effect, is there a risk that, well, if you don't deliver, come a review, the lapse of that planning permission, a site that potentially phase 2 would kind of get that capacity? I mean, I don't know if the development industry is kind of aware of that and kind of wants to kind of capitalise on the available capacity.
Yes, Councillor C2 is very keen on that approach. Our lead member, Mr. Wilson, and I meet him quite regularly, and he says that at most meetings. So yeah, he's extremely keen that developers do go on and build, and if they don't, then we'll need to review the phasing schedule.
Mm-hmm. I mean, but from the council's sort of own intelligence, I mean, does that filter down on the ground? Do you think, I mean, some of these sites have got to kind of start happening sort of fairly quickly and deliver sort of significant numbers in a relatively short period of time. Do you think people are cognizant of that and aware that there is a risk that if they don't deliver those sites, you may be in a position where, there might be a more deliverable phase 2? site snapping at their heels?
Yeah, I mean, yes, certainly in pre-application and in application discussions with developers, we do make it clear that some part of the process we've agreed with TfL is a review, a kind of an ongoing rolling review of implementation, and that does seem to have galvanised delivery. So at the moment, there are about just over 700 homes under construction, and in the first quarter of 21-22, so over the next two months or so, that figure will go just to over 1,000. The Malt Street scheme will start on site, and also a scheme on Glenhall Rose, which is owned by a housing association. So it's something we've been very explicit about with developers and landowners, and it does seem to be driving delivery, which is of course what we wanted it to do, what we want to achieve, and it is one of the products of having to manage the phasing in a way which is orientated around delivery rather than just the grant of planning permissions.
Thank you. Are there any further comments people wish to make in terms of sort of factual changes in circumstances? Mr. Brearley, please.
Thank you. Yes, well, I just wanted to put a counter view on that idea of retaining flexibility on the phasing. Yes, for sure. The threat of that will incentivize development, but on the other hand, it will tend to continue the uncertainty and in some areas blighting of the area. If other permissions can be granted and even the granting conditions, the inference can be juggled around between schemes, we're all going to be in limbo for another decade. I don't think that's really a good trade-off just to incentivize development. It's a real issue if the behind closed doors discussions between GLA and the council can keep moving the goalposts on the phasing, having already cooked it all up behind closed doors, this phasing that came out of nowhere, to then say we can change it again when we fancy. It just leaves us all just not knowing what on earth is going on for a decade.
Okay. Thank you for that. I mean, obviously there's the phasing plan specifically for Old Kent Road. I think it's part of the appendix. It's in Appendix 2. I think it's EIP 82A. It's kind of fairly detailed Gantt chart and spatial maps that show that. So we've got that in front of us. If there are no further points in terms of just sort of factual updates, I'm going to move on to agenda item 3. I mean, obviously Old Kent Road is obviously opportunity area within the London plan as a single location at 20,000 homes. And I think you're right, it's 10,000 new jobs. Is that the figure, or is it 5,000? 10,000? Mr. Wilson's nodding. I mean, there's one location. I mean, this is more growth than most local plans in total will kind of deal with. Obviously, we've heard as part of Matter 2, we had quite a long discussion as part of the spatial strategy. I wasn't intending to kind of revisit that now, but just obviously to note, we obviously heard from particularly Mr. Brearley from Vital OKR, your objections to the overarching sort of strategy, which obviously you don't consider is appropriate in terms of the balance between housing and employment. I think we're quite clear you see a strategy that's more employment and less housing than what's put forward in the plan itself. Are you content, Mr. Brearley, that you aired most of what you wanted to say on that point as part of the previous sessions, or is there anything you wish to add as part of the discussion today on sort of the overall sort of approach and strategy that the plan is seeking to do in terms of delivering on the London plan's opportunity area?
Well, yes, I think you've got the main message. I did just think it might be useful to again urge you to have a look at our appendix VOKR 9, which is an assessment we did in 2017. It's actually changed surprisingly little in spite of all the adjustments since then, the basic scenario. And that was our best stab at what this would actually mean for quantum of credible industrial accommodation. To me, it unquestionably shows that you cannot anywhere near deliver the no net loss expectation. Indeed, you dramatically shrink the industrial. And also to note that even that assessment we did back in 2017 was over optimistic because it assumed that several development areas would bring forward some credible industrial space. And as it turns out, many of them haven't. I mean, just been mentioned, the Berkeley Malt Street development, Ruby Triangle was mentioned yesterday, I think. LSE scheme, I don't know whether that was the one referred to on Glengall Road. For example, none of them deliver any credible industrial space. Some of them have some that's labelled as such, but it's laughably unsuitable. Like you can't get to it without going down a staircase, that kind of thing. It's just an absolute joke. So those assessments, even that we did, were over optimistic. So I would urge you to look at that, because I've not seen anything that credibly counters it and makes a case that you can deliver both the opportunity area objectives of the housing growth and the no net loss of industrial. It's the second of those that seems to have been torpedoed.
Okay. Thank you for that. I mean, I will give the council the opportunity to come back. I'm mindful of what we've already heard as part of matter 2 on the spatial strategy, but Council, Mr. Wilson.
Yes, just to respond to some of Mark's points. I mean, we are now starting to get some schemes coming towards practical completion. So the first of those will be in Hatcham Road, 62 Hatcham Road, just off Ilston Road, and within that scheme, the light industrial space has had a condition 106 requirement to provide a category A fit out, and also to provide 3-phase power to the scheme to make it suitable for letting to light industrial makerspace uses, which they are fitting out at the moment. And I spoke to a letting agent a couple of weeks ago who confirms that space is the kind of space that would let to those kind of maker uses, and that's what they're going to be letting it for. So I think what we have done is rather than just say this use will be light industrial, we've taken notes of GLA guidance on providing industrial space, and we've required those fit outs to be delivered at the cost of the developer to ensure that space is fit for purpose. And certainly that particular space also has off-street servicing, which is something else we negotiated in with the developer, and which is something that we require within the AAP. So whilst I'm familiar with Mark's arguments that we will not deliver credible space, I think we are now getting to a point where it will be seen to be delivered, and the people who are occupying it and the uses occupying it are the ones that we've set out in the plan. So I suppose in a sense that kind of proof is in the pudding, should be kind of coming on stream over the next year or so.
Okay, thank you for that. I mean, we will get into kind of the sites later today in terms of the specific requirements and the kind of the feasibility of what's being proposed. I mean, in terms of obviously the plan itself being a reflection or having to sort of embrace what's in the London plan. I mean, does the area vision for Old Kent Road appropriately kind of reflect and make clear that, you know, this is sort of the significant degree of change that's anticipated at this location? Probably a question for the council.
Yes, it does. Reflects the ambitions of the London plan. The opportunity area reflects the growth opportunities that we've identified, so the 20,000 new homes and 10,000 additional jobs, new tube stations, mixed use development, community facilities. So we believe that the vision that does reflect all of those.
Okay, and in terms of the version I'm looking at, which is EIP 27, which is the council's proposed changes, the vision I'm looking at still refers to 5,000, which is over 5,000 new jobs. Is that proposed to be amended to 10,000, or is it still the intention to express it as over 5,000?
I think that was an oversight, sir. We'd like to update it to 10,000.
Okay, and there's a reference to, just on very briefly on this point, a new major town centre, but I think the approach now is it 2 district town centres? Does that again need to just be factually?
Yes.
Okay.
Thank you, sir.
Okay, thank you for that. And in terms of, we just spoke a moment ago about this kind of balance between sort of phase 1 and phase 2. I think reference has already been made to. So schemes are already coming forward that are within or would be assigned within phase 2. And the council's approach, am I right in thinking, is that you're effectively looking at whether you've done this to date, or it's something you're looking at is effectively attaching a Grampian type condition to those phase 2 schemes. Is that yet materialised, or is that just something you're sort of thinking about in terms of some of these sites within Old Kent Road?
I don't think it's materialised yet in an application. Maybe Mr. Wilson could correct me if I'm wrong there.
Yes. So to date, we have one live phase 2 application in, and the discussion, there's an ongoing discussion with the applicants about the Grampian condition position. And then on the other sites identified as phase 2, whilst we had pre-applications, we haven't had a planning submission yet on those phase 2 sites. And one of the reasons for that is essentially the cost of making a planning application on a large site is quite significant. And to date, the feedback we've had from developers is that they don't feel that they could justify that expense with a Grampian condition, meaning that they wouldn't be sure about whether they could implement their schemes. So that's why we haven't had applications in with Grampians, but we do continue to discuss with some of those phase 2 site landowners potential schemes in the future. But I think they would be probably more likely to come forward once there is greater certainty about funding of the Bakerloo line extension.
So in terms of the council's potential approach in this kind of phasing, obviously the area vision refers to the detailed phasing plan. I think looking to the Old Kent Road Area Action Plan, I think to do the work in terms of providing that particular detail. So will the Old Kent Road Area Action Plan spell out or set out this kind of approach of kind of Grampian conditions to manage the phase 2? Is that what I just don't know whether it's something that needs to be sort of flagged up as part of the area vision in this plan, or whether the detail can be left to the Old Kent Road Area Action Plan.
I mean, certainly in terms of the area action plan, one of the things that we've talked at some length with TfL and GLA colleagues has been making very explicit the mechanism for phase 1 and phase 2, and the importance of the Grampian condition on any phase 2 sites that were to go to committee with a recommendation to approve, and that is set out in the current version of the December 2020 AAP. And one of the things we had an opportunity to do between 2017 and 2020 was to kind of finesse that with CFL, with Chris Porter and other colleagues, and also with GLA. So in terms of detail, that is within the AAP. I don't know, Laura, did you want to?
Yes, thank you. So in the Old Kent Road vision in the NSP, we have said about phase 2 and the remaining capacity in phase 2 will be subject to agreement between Southwark, the Greater London Authority and Transport for London. So that mechanism in terms of, we haven't mentioned Grampian conditions specifically, but in terms of the mechanism for how phase 2 could be delivered, that.
Thank you for that. I've got no further questions on that point. In terms of the vision for the area, I don't know if we've got anybody here from HGH on behalf of Tribe Student Homes. No. I mean, obviously there's various submissions looking for specific references to providing for purpose-built student accommodation. I don't know, I was going to ask them whether it was necessary for soundness for that to be referenced within the area vision. I don't know if the council, having read the kind of that statement, has a view on whether this is indicatively or broadly an area that might be suitable for student accommodation. I'm mindful you've obviously got an overarching policy that covers the borough in any event in terms of, is it policy P5?
Yes, sir. Our view is that this area wouldn't be any more or less suitable than any other area in the borough, and so we would apply the borough-wide policy where we weigh up the need for conventional housing versus the need for student housing, and we require the wherever there's new student housing for them to provide 35% affordable in the same way as conventional housing. So we don't consider additional site allocations to be appropriate because it's not necessary at this point when we set out how we're going to meet our targets without needing to put that in the vision.
Thank you for that. And obviously the area vision, not only does it reference the Bakerloo line extension, I mean, it sets quite a clear objective to kind of promote a car-free environment, and something we discussed in terms of sort of the climate change agenda as part of the part 1 sessions. I mean, in terms of achieving or promoting that kind of car-free environment, I mean, beyond the Bakerloo line extension, what else kind of needs to be done or needs to kind of happen to achieve that or kind of support that kind of sustainable kind of movement? Does the vision need to say more than it does about promoting a car-free environment?
Well, we've got the movement plan, so that's our main strategy for doing that, and obviously the very low car parking allowances. I don't think we need any more in the vision, but obviously we do need to do more, so that's what we've set out in our policies, and so I think that it's covered because we talk about the car-free development and the electric vehicles and the cycling. And we link it through to health, which is really important on the Old Kent Road. So I think that we do set out enough, but on the understanding that it's covered additionally elsewhere through the strategic objectives and the other policies in the plan.
I think I've read somewhere in all the various documents as part of this examination, a kind of a concept of is it a healthy high street sort of concept for Old Kent Road? I mean, how does that manifest itself, and is that something that should be explicitly referred to in the vision?
Well, we have work that goes on that with our public health team. We have someone seconded from public health into planning who leads on that, and a lot of that work is on the Old Kent Road. That's in our strategic policy IP2 and our delivery policies. But also we do have funding that delivers that project, but I don't think we need more information. I think that's more an implementation issue rather than a vision issue. But there is a lot of work going on it, but I don't think we need to talk about that in the vision. I think we monitor that as well. That's going in our monitoring table. Mm-hmm. So we can show what we're doing, how it's moving forward. We've also got GLA have just consulted us on measures to show how we're developing healthy high streets as well. So we've been working with them on that.
Thank you. I mean, I was just wondering, and sort of hearing from sort of Mr. Porter a moment ago around sort of existing kind of bus infrastructure capacity on Old Kent Road, whether there was whether it's part of the vision or there's the potential. I mean, it's I would describe from sort of observations that parts of Old Kent Road are still quite sort of car orientated, quite busy arterial route. I just wonder whether as part of visioning and looking ahead both through this plan and the area action plan, whether that kind of the nature of Old Kent Road, obviously recognising it's a 2,000-year-old route, historic, but whether there's kind of this kind of wider sort of car-free concept, getting people walking, cycling, moving to whether the sort of as a consequence of all this growth, the kind of the nature of Old Kent Road as a physical kind of highway and how it functions now kind of significantly changes as a result of all this growth.
We could, so where we talk about the in the development in the second bullet, where we talk about the practical measures that we are using to address the issue of too many vehicle movements in Old Kent Road, we could put some more text in about how it's part of trying to deliver. One of the main issues is the segmentation of the area by the road. That's a big issue, especially for local people. And the purpose of the plan and the way we've laid it out is so that people don't need to get in their cars to do anything. So you could do everything you need to do if you lived in Old Kent Road without getting in a car. So that's one of our main objectives. So we could add some wording in on those with the bullet 2 of the development should.
Okay. We'll think about that. I mean, I just wonder whether as part of the sort of visioning something sort of quite different will kind of emerge for Old Kent Road. Perhaps if I can hear from Mr. Wilson, and then I'll come to Mr. Brearley.
Yes, just picking up on your question about healthy high streets. So TfL have been investigating a healthy high street project for the Old Kent Road. I mean, obviously that was disrupted by COVID and furlough and other issues, but essentially it was taking forward the healthy high streets strategy from the transport plan. And if you look at the healthy high streets strategy, they have an illustration of CGI that does look quite a bit like Old Kent Road, although it was anonymised. The aspiration is to see if a greater balance can be given to pedestrians and cyclists and buses over private vehicles, but it's quite challenging because of the arterial nature of the road. There are options which have been technically investigated over the last couple of years but there isn't yet a preferred option, and so TfL haven't been able to take that forward to any public consultation. And it is their road, so they are the transport authority for the A2. But we have restarted discussions with Chris Porter's colleagues on that project, and hopefully, if TfL get a funding settlement in the near future, that would kind of reboot itself. And that would include things like dedicated cycle lanes north and south on the Old Kent Road. Is one of the things that they've been looking at, the gyratory at Dunton Way. But these things all need to be kind of revisited post their financial settlement for TfL. And in addition, there are things which we can contribute to in terms of a kind of more sustainable town centre and high streets, in terms of our own highway network. So we are looking for options to close some roads, particularly outside schools, and we're also looking at options for smaller interventions which can improve walking routes. For instance, at the end of Ossory Road, we have been talking to Berkeley Homes about making a pedestrian connection through the end of Ossory Road to Haymill Road, Bianca Road, which would then give access to businesses and local residents to and from effectively the town centre and to Asda. So there are smaller interventions like that. And of course, within that mix, we're very cognizant of the businesses and our idea of promoting business growth. So we want to make sure that we don't compromise the ability of businesses to service their businesses, and to practically operate. So there's that to kind of hold in the balance as well.
Thank you for that. Mr. Brewerley next, please.
Thank you. Yes, all good. I just wanted to support, if there's an idea brewing of the vision saying something clearer about the aspiration of High Street, both this thing about the nature of it as a transport corridor and making it more balanced in allowing for pedestrians and cyclists and all of that, but also the nature of High Street as accommodation in relation to frontage. Feels to me like the council have been a bit confused and sitting on the fence about this for several years. Do you want to continue as High Street or not? I think probably the groundswell of opinion is yes. Well, that needs much more clearly saying, because it's not really what the master plan is showing, and we are tending to see, unsurprisingly, developments coming forward which do little clusters of frontage-based E-class uses around their own precincts, which is rather at odds with trying to push that kind of public life to create a more continuous high street along the sections of the Old Kent Road where it's been blown apart or never existed in some cases. So I think just a little bit in the vision that makes clear, if that is what the council want, I think it's what many others want, that it is the intention to try to push forward a continuous high street, i.e. that has a frontage and a reasonable sort of depth structure to it that can take, well, predominantly E-class uses of various sorts and create a public life. That really should be a central objective.
Thank you for that, Mr. Brewerley. Now I've got is it a Mr. Bussey?
Hello. Yes.
Hello.
Good morning. Good morning, Inspector and others. It's really this. Much as I would agree with Mr. Brewerley's remarks, the problem with the Old Kent Road is the through traffic. The fact you're going to take our cars away really will make very little difference to the street. It is the through traffic of deliveries, major supplies, works vehicles. These are the people that depend on the Old Kent Road, and this plan is so vast, but it doesn't seem to do a thing about the through traffic on this road, which is a real killer, really. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you for that. I mean, I suspect some of that comes back to the point I think Mr. Wilson was making a moment ago. I mean, this was obviously a key arterial route within London. It's TfL infrastructure. I guess it's a combination of all plans in unison with the London plan, trying to affect the overall modal shift target of whatever it is, 80% of journeys by non sort of car motorized vehicle means. But comments noted. Thank you for those. I mean, just more generally in terms of the Old Kent Road area, I mean, are there other kind of infrastructure issues? I think there's a resolution or there's a statement of common ground with the Environment Agency, so there are no sort of significant drainage or water infrastructure capacity issues. Is that correct?
That's correct.
I'm getting nods. Yep. And then in terms of utilities, I think there was a utility report as part of the examination. In terms of electrical supply, I think I've read that there will need to be an upgrade. I think there's a substation in the Old Kent Road area that will be upgraded, but once that's done, that seems to provide you with enough capacity to support the growth that's envisaged. Is that right?
Yes, sir.
Getting nods. Just want to make sure I'm reading the evidence correctly. Thank you. I mean, I've got no further questions on item 3. I think when we look at the individual sites, that will again sort of work through the kind of the delivery of the strategy. I've got somebody on behalf of Friends of Burgess Park, please.
Hi, good morning. Susan Crisp here for Friends of Burgess Park. Yeah, I've just double checked the agenda and I can see you're going to go on to agenda item number 4. Sorry, I thought I would missed my chance, so I quickly put my hand up, but it's actually the open spaces item on the agenda that I'm interested in. So I'll wait for that. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Brearley, please.
Thank you. I just wanted to pick up on the positively prepared bit of item 3. To emphasize how much the strategy has come from the master planning and alongside it the several of the specific development proposals, and surely therefore those need to have been positively prepared since they've been translated into the area action plan components and the diagrammatized simplified version in the NSP. If they'd been positively prepared, then we might have seen, for example, heritage assessments before they commenced, but actually heritage assessments still are only just being completed, and the people doing it were steered away from saying anything positive about places where there were already development schemes. The auditing of the economy came very late in the day, long after plans had already started forming. The workspace demand study came late. In fact, it took nearly a year and a freedom of information request for us even to see it. And there has been only very cursory public consultation on the AAP, nothing really that referred to the significance of the NSP in all this. And again, the master plans themselves, the only consultation was with some of the major landowners. I have to stress this very strongly, and I was very upset on Monday to hear a suggestion that there'd been extensive consultation on the master plans. There has not. We did not know about those master planning processes. Again, we had to do actually 2 freedom of information requests to even get to see the briefs. And it was only after that that the conclusion of those master planning exercises was put on the council website and a link was shared with us after the event. The reports show workshop sessions ongoing with big models, with the developers and the bigger landowners, the likes of Berkeley Homes, with the council officers. But we didn't even know that was happening. Even smaller landowners, none of the businesses, residents weren't involved in those master planning processes. So I really think if part of positively prepared is around getting some sort of shared vision, is there not some phrase like that in NPPF, then it has failed to do that. People in the area feel that this process has happened largely behind closed doors, and all we've had in a sort of faux consultation is being presented at with the conclusions. Is that all right then? While development proposals are being approved. This is not a process that is what you would regard as reasonable public engagement and consultation.
Thank you for that, Mr. Braley. Mr. Bussey, and then I'll come to Mr. Wilson.
Again, I would very much support what Mr. Braley has been saying. My experience with the Old Kent Road Master Plan was during the first consultation on the draft master plan. We were all sort of looking at what was in the book and trying to respond to it. And only afterwards did we realise that the council had been negotiating with Ruby Triangle, Cantium, Southernwood about these vast buildings. we were sort of thinking, oh, 20 stories, this would be terrible. 30 stories, that would be disgraceful. They were already talking about 50 stories. I mean, the whole thing was just set in concrete at that point, because you get these vast blocks down the Old Kent Road, and our little views are just completely wiped away. Well, that was in response to what Mr. Braley said. What I really wanted to say was this program for the Bakerloo line extension the contracts might be let in 10 years. Work might start on site in 15 years. Trains might actually be running in 20 years, 25 years. I mean, if Crossrail is anything to go by, and these things always slip, we could be here with this vast plan over our heads for a sort of 25 years without it working, or without, the key bits of it functioning. Those of us that live here are going to have to live, well, some of us won't, but a lot of people are going to have to live through, 25 years of blight, construction, demolition, God knows what, chaos. This does seem like, this huge scheme I've put down here, it is like a monster that has taken over, and to me, it's out of control. But I'm only just a little local resident. The other thing about the Bakerloo line extension is that the Old Kent Road needs investment now. It needs money coming into it somehow or another, especially the area that I'm most interested in between Tesco's and Surrey Square, that stretch there, which is the only sort of old bit, the only bit that didn't get bombed, I think is probably what it is. There's still a bit of the old character there, and it really does need investment now. It can't wait these 20, 25 years for the Bakerloo line to come along with some money, or the investors who are waiting for the Bakerloo line to start investing. It really does need it now. I think I've said enough. That's all I have to say.
Thank you for that, Mr. Bussey. And I think you'll see from our sort of further agenda items, and when we come to some of the sites, I think this is something we're interested in as inspectors. A certain amount of development is going to happen now, and how will that work on its, some extent, on its own or as an initial phase versus what is potentially coming sort of down the line in terms of the further phases. So I think we're cognizant of kind of potentially the risks of potentially a sort of a piecemeal kind of approach emerging. In response to those points, and I think Mr. Wilson first, and I think Mr. Porter wants to come back in on this as well. So Mr. Wilson, please.
Yes, just taking some of those points in turn. I mean, as we've already discussed, the phasing, I think, does deal with the issue about when the Bakerloo line will arrive. So it's very consciously about getting development, the building of housing, creation of jobs, the creation of that high street up and running sooner rather than later. But this is never all going to happen all at the same time. I think often there's a sense of that if you have a plan that says eventually you will deliver 20,000 homes, that it's all going to happen overnight. That won't be the case. As I say, probably by the end of this year there'll be somewhere in the region of 1,000 homes under construction spread throughout Old Kent Road. And if we can maintain that rate, we would have got to that phase one probably by the end of this decade at about 1,000 homes and associated commercial space being delivered per year. And certainly I think, over the next couple of years, changes will start to happen along the Old Kent Road in some locations that have been mentioned. And I think they will be for the better. In terms of Mark's point about consultation, I think we have engaged in very, very extensive consultation on the Old Kent Road plan. The reason for doing the 2017 plan with the master plans in was to make that a public piece of information and to share that and to be as explicit as we could be about how we felt development would come forward in the Old Kent Road. And we have tried to respond to that over the last 3 or 4 years. We haven't responded to absolutely everything, but we have set out where we have changed the plan and indeed where we haven't. Certainly myself and other members of the team have spent a lot of time in the Old Kent Road in the forum events, which we're having every 4 weeks in the Old Kent Road, which Mark and others attended. There were other engagement events. I would not say that we were perfect in engaging, and we are continuing trying to improve that, but I think we have put in a tremendous effort to engage with people with those plans and to make them available. Mark mentioned heritage assessments. There were earlier heritage assessments as part of the Eliza Morrison townscape studies. We then commissioned our own subsequent assessments using local expertise to carry out those assessments. We have issued Article 4 directions. We've extended conservation areas to protect the heritage in Old Kent Road. I think there will always be a debate about which heritage you do or don't protect when it's not in a conservation area and it's not listed. And we have had those debates with Mark, certainly, and with landowners who are not, as you might expect, always keen on having Article 4 directions placed on their what they see as their land and their buildings. And in terms of some of Mark's more detailed points as well, the workplace demand study is a very thorough demand study and is up to date. When Mark mentions having to FOI to get hold of a finished copy of it, the difficulty we had was we didn't have a finished copy of it because our consultant had overstretched themselves and were unable to finish it. So it wasn't a case of us not wanting to share that. It was more of a case of us having to chase our consultant team up to finish it so that we could share that work. And I think, we've been very open with that evidence base and with its conclusions and with its, frankly, up-to-dateness. And we've looked at that workspace provision in a lot of detail, including looking at physical provision for yard and service space, the provision for other spaces in the Old Kent Road, including car parking and space left over after planning. So we've really gone into that in a tremendous amount of detail. And yeah, that's just my comments in response to Mr. Bussey and Mr. Brealey's comments.
Thank you for that. Can I hear from Mr. Porter, please?
Thank you, sir. Again, video is working. I just wanted to respond to the points around the Bakerloo line extension and investment now. I mean, I think just to re-emphasise, the reason we've sort of got the construction contract as essentially the release for phase 2 is that's the point at which we believe we would have reasonable certainty of deliverability. So that's when we would expect to deliver it. So until we've reached that point, we wouldn't accept further phase developments coming forward, simply so as we can protect the network and make sure we don't have that unlimited disruption. So we see that as essentially a safety valve. I think talked about sort of delivery timetables. I think absolutely we don't expect the Bakerloo line extension to be delivered certainly until the 2030s, and I think that's quite clear within the financial sustainability plan. We would be expected, I think, to sign the construction contract before, which is likely to be potentially the late 20s or early 30s, but delivery certainly not until the 2030s. And I think finally, just in terms of investment earlier, this is one of the points that was being touched on with the Healthy Streets scheme. And we acknowledge, and we're working with the borough, looking at how we can develop that road, recognising that we're the owners of it. And that's linked very clearly into the Mayor's ambitions for healthy streets as set out in the Mayor's Transport Strategy and London Plan. And that's something we're looking to collect money from developments coming forward at the moment. So that investment before the Bakerloo line extension is something we're looking to do to support the phase 1 developments. Thank you.
Thank you for that. I'm now going to move on in terms of the agenda. Others have been sort of patiently waiting, I think, for item 4. So I'm going to go to that next, because we've got about 20 or so minutes left for this session before we need to take a break. If I can go to item 4, then I'm going to go straight to subpart 3, which is around securing open space. The vision refers to, I think, a greener belt extending from, I think, Burgess Park along, I think, is it the former alignment of the Surrey Canal. I think there's also the area vision map also shows new open space at Mandela Way. In terms of delivering that link or that network of kind of open spaces. I mean, is the vision for Old Kent Road? Again, bear in mind there are other policies of the plan that seek open space provision. I mean, is the plan setting a sort of a positively prepared vision for a network of green infrastructure at Old Kent Road?
Thank you, sir. Yes, it does. So the area vision map shows the indicative locations for the open space. We've also shown those on the relevant site allocations. It does fit with the wider greener belt strategy as well in terms of how it would be delivered. In particular, some of the larger park spaces, there's a range of spaces that we'd be delivering in Old Kent Road, from pocket parks to larger strategic park spaces. The larger ones are at Mandela Way, the Linear Park, along the alignment of the Surrey Canal, and at the old gasworks. The first section of the Surrey Canal Linear Park falls within phase 1 developments as part of the Glengall Road Canteen Retail Park site allocation, and many of those schemes delivering parts of the linear park have been committed. so that the earlier stages of that open space delivery could be seen to be delivered in phase 1. So part of the open spaces could come forward. There's a number of other schemes that are committed as well with open spaces. They're shown indicatively on the master plan or on the NSP site allocations that are also delivering that part of that strategic target for increasing open space.
Thank you for that. So if I can turn to Ms. Crisp on behalf of the Friends of Burgess Park. I mean, obviously Burgess Park fronts onto, has a point of access from the Old Kent Road. In terms of your concerns about the plan as currently presented, in terms of the relationship of this planned growth to Burgess Park.
Yeah, thank you. Good morning, everybody. Yeah, so I want to start off by supporting the plans that the council are proposing for the Green Link, the increasing of the open space provision that's set out in the draft Old Kent Road Area Action Plan, and their approach of seeking collaboration between landowners to get that green space to happen. EIP 148, the Old Kent Road Open Spaces Strategy, sets out the details and methodology to achieve that, and it sort of builds on the 2013 Open Spaces Strategy, SP 602. And there are 2 points that I want to make particularly. So the first is about that allocating part of Burgess Park into the Old Kent Road for understanding green space against the population. And the second point I want to make is about the implications of building on housing land green space, which is happening elsewhere in the borough. So to my first point, the allocating part of Burgess Park into the Old Kent Road as a sort of analytical tool for understanding the amount of green space, and I completely understand why that has been done, and it's a sort of desktop exercise to get that understanding about green space. But I am then concerned that what does that mean in terms of other plans for other parts of the borough? And I think that kind of methodology needs to be developed further to really understand that, because obviously you've got Burgess Park is literally in the middle of the borough, and so you've got the Aylesbury to the north, the Old Kent Road to the south, to the east, sorry, and the Peckham and Camberwell around the sort of southern edge. So it is a very important green space, and I think that would be something that needs to be thought about more carefully going forward if parts of the park are being used in that sort of technical sense, so that there is a full understanding of the green space. And I think that brings me to my second point, which is about the implications of building on housing land green space. And I think it's a particular issue in Southwark because of the size of the housing portfolio, the housing, the amount of housing which is owned by Southwark Council, and therefore the amount of land that is in the borough is enormous. And so the green spaces and also to some extent the ball courts and the sort of general play and amenity space is part of the overall mix of space in the borough and the green space. And I realise that there's a sort of technical question here about how the land is described as borough open space, other open space, sports space, leisure space. There's probably a whole load of typologies, and I appreciate that, but I think I'm sort of making, what I'm trying to make is the point of the impact of building on housing green space at the same time as trying to identify these other new spaces, because are we actually going to end up with any more space unless there's a fairly close a good analysis taking place and proper tracking of where we're losing space and where we're gaining space. Now that is done around all the other open space. And I noted in I think it was now what was it called? Sorry, I'm going to have to just check my notes and just get that reference right. It's in the EIP 82A site methodology. There is a table, I think it's table 2, which increases or identifies new spaces to add in as green spaces, and this includes some allotments, and it includes some space on housing land, I think probably where it's got some specific characteristics that make it interesting and useful as an open space. But there is a real problem, because I mean, for example, 1.6 hectares, is being lost on Bell's Gardens because the green space is being used. And then you also get the situation where at the Elephant and Castle, where we've got the new elephant park, which is identified within the 82A sites methodology report, that there is a new 800 square meters of green space. But in actual fact, that is space which was, I realise it's been slightly reconfigured, but it was part of housing land. So it has some very established trees, for example, which have been incorporated into that new elephant park. And the reason that's been possible to have that park as such a, I mean, it's a lovely park, but the reason it's been possible to do that is because those trees were saved.
Sorry, excuse me. Have we lost the inspector, Inspector Mylan? Have we lost the other inspector, please? Sorry, Ms. Chris. I just noticed I can't see him on the screen.
Thank you. Yes, I've just noticed that Mr. Spencer had dropped off the session. I have been listening, but I was looking at a document, so I think he's only just dropped out from the session. So what it might be prudent to do, Ms. Crisp, is just to pause where you are for the moment. What we'll do is we'll perhaps just give Mr. Spencer a couple of minutes to see if he rejoins us. What we may do actually is just take a very brief couple of minutes adjournment, just to so that I can contact Mr. Spencer and see if we can get him back on there, back on the call again. Okay, so we'll come back and I'll give you an update in a couple of minutes, and hopefully it will be resolved by then. Thank you. Hello again, everybody. Just to give you a brief update, that I've made contact with my colleague, and he's had a very brief but quite disruptive power cut, which I think has thrown his internet connection and computer into some disarray. So he's in the process of turning the handle and booting that up again. So hopefully Mr. Spencer will be joining us very shortly, but I think we perhaps might just need to prepare ourselves for a sort of a further brief period of sort of 5 minutes or so, and hopefully he'll be back on online. So what I'll do is we'll just carry on with the adjournment, and hopefully Mr. Spencer will be with us shortly. And if for any reason that doesn't quite work, I'll obviously update participants as well. Thank you, everyone.
Hello, is there anybody there?
Yes, we're here. We were just
Okay.
Welcome back.
Thank you. I apologise. I literally had like a 1 to 2 second split power cut. I obviously talked up substations in Old Kent Road without thinking about maybe I need a new substation closer to where I live. So apologies for that. It just completely sent my mobile internet router into meltdown. So thank you for your patience. I think everybody is here who was with us previously, and I was in the middle of hearing from Susan Crisp. So if I can go back to Ms. Crisp to conclude what you were saying, please.
right. I'm not obviously not going to repeat it all, but I'll just sort of go back to my just sort of reiterate my central points. So the first one was obviously to support the Green Link and the council's approach in working with landowners to get that green space and the additional green space which is planned. And then the sort of follow-on points with that was to make the point about allocating part of Burgess Park into the Old Kent Road in order to do a sort of desktop exercise to understand the amount of green space is perfectly understood, but what are the implications in terms of other areas around the park, particularly the Aylesbury, doing the same exercise, and for the sort of general understanding of green space in the borough and what there is. And therefore wishing to raise the point about the implications of building on housing green space, particularly in Southwark, where there's a lot of housing land. It's a big part of the space of the borough.
Sorry, Ms. Crew, I mean, obviously, I did hear all this before the power cuts. I've got that. I think you got to, was it point A, EIP 82A?
Right.
Identified the point about
yeah, so it's still the same point, and I was using the Elephant Park as an example where that had been part of housing land, and was now that land as part of the redevelopment of the Elephant and Castle area has been some of it has been kept as open land, and it's now been designated as open space. But it's not actually any extra land. It was there before as a green space. So it's this sort of understanding and keeping track and tabs at a council level, at the borough level, in terms of what is happening with that green space which is missing. So for example, in EIP 82A table 3, there is an additional 53.138 open space identified. It's not necessarily all new open space. It's been sort of identified and tracked down. So there is a very detailed tracking process and sort of adjustment of boundaries and things like that. There's a whole section in that about adjustment to park boundaries and things. And yet at the same time, you've got Bell's Gardens, which is in Peckham, having a space of 1.7 being, I'm not sure if it's agreed or proposed, but the principle of the point I'm making is about as fast as the council is identifying new spaces and putting in additional green space, and the Old Kent Road is obviously an example, you're also getting a loss of space where you're having building taking place on housing land. And I realise it will be classified differently as play or amenity space within that housing provision, but it is part of the overall provision. And clearly, certainly ball courts are obviously generally, used by local kids. It's not a sort of, you cannot come in, it's not got a locking fob on it as we've got with some new play spaces. So I was just wanting to make that broader point about having an overall grasp of those spaces and what's being lost and what's being gained, because it's not all going in one direction. Thank you.
So it's the kind of the net sort of picture, and is that sort of linked to, I mean, from the Friends of Burgess Park, I mean, is it concerned about sort of cumulative pressure from sort of all these developments?
Yeah, I mean, obviously there is the cumulative pressure, but I think it is the point that we've got this situation where there is a plan to build on housing land, and not all of it is green space. But I'm just saying that there is a loss of green space happening at the same time as this new space is being found, and obviously that's very welcome. But it does obviously have cumulative impact, particularly if you're also losing this space on housing land, which isn't being tracked and presented as part of the bigger picture. In fact, you know, I've only recently become more aware of this, or else I would have put it in my written representations. But there's been quite a lot of sort of discussion locally about this in the last few months, which has made me much more aware of the loss of green space on the housing estates. So it is the overall impact and what that means, and keeping track of it. And so I would like to propose that is included in the monitoring table, which I don't think it is at the moment. I've had a brief look at it, but I haven't looked at it comprehensively. Because otherwise there isn't going to be an oversight, basically. How can there be political oversight on this, or officer oversight and an understanding, unless there's a proper tracking process? Thank you.
Thank you. Well, we'll certainly pick that up as part of Matter 9 next week. We look at monitoring, so I've made a note of that. I mean, just more generally in terms of the Old Kent Road area, as I understand it, on a sort of a borough-wide level, there is an overall deficiency of kind of standard quantum of open space per population. I mean, in terms of, for want of a better phrase, development at Old Kent Road sort of consuming its own needs, its own sort of requirements for open space, will the developments that are planned meet that kind of open space requirement on site, or will there be an expectancy that, you know, that the additional population will have to rely on existing forms of open space and sport and recreation facilities?
I can give you my view on that.
Mm-hmm.
So there it has been a big effort to put in this green link and identify new green spaces, and that has increased from earlier iterations of the plan to now, and that is obviously very welcome. And then there has been this process of drawing in part of Burgess Park and identifying existing green spaces and kind of capturing that data about those green spaces and bringing it into that desktop methodology. It's not, you know, there are some spaces which have just been identified and brought into it to bring the quantum of green space up. So that's been a sort of a desktop exercise. I think in terms of the sports, there in the new draft Old Kent Road Area Action Plan, there is more provision for sports than there was previously. So I personally feel that's been recognised. But I think there is this issue with sports provision about what's suitable for sort of not professional matches, sort of proper sports games where you have to have certain size pitches, and that is very different obviously from a ball court and a knockabout area. So I think there is a need to recognise that you have to have both, and if that provision, and from a green spaces point of view, of course, if that provision isn't made for sports provision, what will happen when you get the new population? There will then be more demand for green space to become converted, or existing sports provision to be increased in size, which is what's happening at Burgess Park at the moment, that there's a push to, well, there is actually an additional sports pitch being incorporated into the park. So it is a real tension in terms of, you know, land use and allocation, which I completely appreciate, but some sports provision can be provided in a way that isn't in green space. You know, it can be within buildings. It is a hard surface as opposed to a green surface, and so it can be accommodated in different ways. Thank you.
Thank you. I think the council might tell me about site 65. I think that includes a sports hall elements, but I'll hear from Mr. Brearley next, please.
Thank you. Yes, I think there is a problem with the way the master plans all add up and the developments that are flowing from them on this matter. That we're seeing in the master plans, we see huge amounts of development amenity space. You know, mostly paved with kind of decorative landscape, the place you might be able to sit on a bench or access a cafe. Berkeley Home Scheme is a good example. Big areas of it, and you add all that up, and it's enough for most small cities. And yet, then as well, there's this struggle to deliver proper green space, and they're quite distinct. There is a tendency for developers to obviously want to make these plaza-like spaces for their delivering green space, and that I think it'd be really helpful to call a spade on the linear green thing. It isn't a linear green thing. There's a very valid, good aspiration. Seems like it could be achieved to make a foot and cycle link along that route, and parts of that are along a slightly widened footway of a road. One bit of it goes through one new green space on the Cantium site. Looks like it would be a good little park. One bit of it goes through the Berkeley Homes scheme. Other bits of it are likely to be going through industrial yards that are shared, and that would be great too. But it isn't really realistic for that to be seen as a linear park. It's not a linear park. It's not like the canal link through to Peckham, which was put there when they filled in the canal. It's not that. And I think that the real challenge is this excess, I think you're going to find, of paved type, not very well used, potentially, public amenity space within developments. And then alongside that, struggling to deliver some green spaces. You know, the council ending up having to deliver on themselves on land that really should be industrial around the gas holders, because they're not really getting that through most of the development. So I think there's a real conundrum that goes back to the problem of the master plans.
Thank you for that, Mr. Brearley. Mr. Wilson, please.
Yes, and the just going back to the shortage of open space provision as exists, when that was mapped, it's no great surprise. The greatest shortage in a kind of mapped sense of accessibility open sense is in the around Mandela Way and also around the gasworks, where currently nobody lives, and it's primarily an industrial use. And one of the other great issues is the way the land was divided up when the canal was filled in. So a lot of the boundary conditions between site ownerships are along the alignment of the old canal, which stretches east-west through the site. So you can't physically walk, say, from Moss Road to Bianca Road because of that. So that limits then access to existing space, which is coming on to your point about the degree to which existing space as well as new space will contribute to what we are providing. We have committed to increasing the amount of open space in the area in response to engagements over the last 3 years. That has, as Mark has indicated, involved us committing to use our own land to provide additional park space, such as the Frensham Street Depot. And we think a combination of us using our own land, which enables us to control it in the longer term, and also enables us to secure that delivery as the landowner, is one way of getting closer to meeting the open space deficiency. And the overall Greener Belt strategy and the strategy set out in the AAP then articulate the way in which we better connect existing spaces and new spaces, so that in terms of the length of time that you have to walk between spaces and your accessibility, that will be greatly enhanced. So the population will increase, but its accessibility to parks like Burgess Park will increase. The other thing that we're looking at doing is using community infrastructure levy and 106 payments to enhance existing park spaces, and also to fund some of the new park spaces. So we think the qualitative issues can be addressed as well. Within those qualitative issues, one of the things we are very keen to do is to make sure that these new spaces don't look like corporate hard landscapes. So one of the things that we have been discussing with developers, including Berkeley Homes, is ensuring that they adopt the language of our own parks, such as Burgess Park, such as the seating and signage, which is a very good quality, and so it feels like it's part of the municipal park network. To Mark's point about hard landscape, all the landscape is reserved by condition in the permissions, and we have been in the process, or it's been disrupted over the last year, of developing a more detailed design strategy called a Parks and Recreation strategy for that open space. And that really is very focused on making that a greener space and less of a corporate feeling to the space. Mark's absolutely right. I think that the instinct of a lot of large house builders is to go for that kind of hard landscape. But what we have been really engaged with them with is moving away from that and having a far greener space. And that's the result of conversations with local residents and friends of Burgess Park and others. And what Old Kent Road doesn't lack at the moment is hard landscape. There's more than enough of it. So everybody, I think, is signed up to that, and we think we can, through that condition process and through developing our own strategy, ensure that this is a greener space. And that's essential as well to deal with issues like utilities. So the combined sewer is put under less stress, and it's all part of the requirements for greenfield runoff rates. We haven't yet approved details for that linear park. We anticipate they'll probably start appearing over the next 6 months. But as I say, we're already engaged in those conversations about making those far greener spaces. I think it is the case that we don't quite meet the requirements for open space with the projected population, but we are continually looking at opportunities to increase open space. And I suppose another noteworthy point is around Mandela Way, where we are proposing a brand new park space, which is basically split between 4 existing landowners. And we've had that conversation with those landowners over the last 4 years, so they know that's the expectation from us as a public authority, that they will provide for that space in that location. And in addition, unlike other parts of Southwark, we also have a requirement of a 5 square metres per home open space provision. Some of the sites provide that on site, and where they don't, in the master plan, we do take a 106 payment. So it's effectively a sort of an equalisation arrangement. So that if you're a landowner who's identified as providing open space, you provide it. And if you're not, you still have to make a financial contribution to the overall provision of open space.
Thank you.
Sorry, sir, could I just add something to that, if that's okay? Basically, I'd just like to explain that the way that open space works and that we measure it is that we have the metropolitan open land, the other open space, and the borough open land. And they've all got very clear definitions about what would be considered under those different types of designations. And then the amenity space within estates, we do not protect that as a designation for open space. That is amenity land for the housing that it's built on. And so we will be monitoring, well, we do monitor all of these things. And in the monitoring plan, we monitor them by area and by the whole borough. And so and we won't just be measuring amenity space as a whole. We measure the different types of space, so whether it's children's play space, communal, amenity space. So that's what we monitor at the moment. I will check back and make sure that the document that we have presented is clear on all of those issues. Again, I'll go back and check it again, but that's what we will be monitoring.
Okay, thank you for that. There were a couple of other points I had under agenda item 4. I think because of what's happened and we've lost a little bit of time due to my unexpected power cut, I was going to pick, it was really a question for the council. I'm proposing I'll now pick that up towards the end of this afternoon's session. I think probably Mr. Brearley, I think, are you joining us for all the sites discussions today?
Yes, I am. Yes, I did want to make a point on 4.1, if it's possible.
It is. I mean, I was intending that 4.1, I think, would come out through some of the individual site discussions as well. But if there's a broad sort of general point you wanted to make now, that's fine. Yeah.
Thank you. Yes, it's. I've said earlier in the examination about what seems to me a failure of the case-by-case business relocation approach. There was some rebuttal of that, but I don't agree with the rebuttal. But on the wider question also, in relation to phasing of development, I don't believe that the master plans that now reflected in these site allocations give a coherent way forward for decanting bigger and even bigger chunks of development occupative use. So, for example, there's a belated idea. Good thinking. We need somewhere to decant Tesco to. Good. But where do we decant Asda to? Where do we decant Selco, B&Q, Travis Perkins, HHS, Royal Mail, DPD, Constantine, and then go down a scale, the likes of Benchmarks, DX, Edmondson, Jayhawk, probably about 20 at that scale of 5 to 15,000 square meter things. There's the retail version of that, others like B&M and Iceland. No sign of where those would go in the master plan. We heard Colin Wilson saying this heartwarming little story about this thing being built on Ilderton Road and how they've insisted on 3-phase power. Well, that's all very charming, but maker space, great, that's good, but that is not the kind of space that is going to allow these kind of businesses to move, businesses that need to stay in the area because that's what they serve. And these businesses, unlike someone like Lidl, who can move into Toys R Us while they redevelop, they can double decant. Most industrial businesses, it's just not realistic. They can't move somewhere for a year and then move back when it's all been redeveloped. They need space in the phasing of the plan, and it needs lots of 5 to 15,000 square foot industrial things. It needs several bigger ones for some of these, and we don't see that in the master plan. It's just not there.
Excuse me, sir, could I just make a point of, just because I think we're in the wrong link now, and so I'm just a bit concerned that there's another Zoom link that we're supposed to be in. Is that right?
Yeah, I think
Correct.
because so we're still in part 1 and we need to come out and go into part 2. I think that's why, Mr. Milam.
Thank you, Mr. Spencer. I wasn't sort of wishing to interject if you were coming to a close of this session, but I think it would be appropriate if Jacqueline could make contact with the other participants who would be joining us for the next link, and just to advise them that we are running a little bit late and that we will join that in due course. I'm assuming we still want to take an approximate 15-minute adjournment, so perhaps if Jacqueline could advise them that we'll perhaps aim to start at about 10 to 12 session.
Yeah.
So if I could just say from the council that we don't need to take a break. So if you want to take a shorter break, that's fine. We're used to just going all morning. So if just to get things done, because I'm just worried about implications for lunch or whatever.
Yeah, sure. I mean, I think I've just double checking. I think I've heard from everybody who I think I was anticipating to hear from this morning. I've got a Josephine Vos or Voss. I don't know if any additional points you wish to raise.
No, I'm just here to support Chris Porter, and if there were any other wider policy issues for the London plan.
Thank you. Okay, so what I'll suggest is we'll bring this part 1 session to a close now. If we could come back at 12:45, and then people log in on the part 2 invite, and we'll pick up the sites at 11:45. Okay.
Okay.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.